haven't been here all day. I have, and it's been fabulous, and I'm so happy to see all of you here this afternoon. I'm Nan Sonater. I'm director of the Book Festival and librarian here at the Provincetown Library. To introduce our guests, I have a member of the Library Board of Trustees, Laurel Godosno, and I'm going to just hand it over to her.
And as Nan said, welcome. It's really a pleasure to see so many people enjoying this beautiful building and this wonderful library. I'd like to introduce you to Jane Paradise. Jane is an internationally recognized photographer and Provincetown resident who photographs the profound and intimate connection between people and their environment. In 1923, Schiffer published The Dune Shacks of Provincetown, which features her photographs alongside quotes by those who have lived in the shacks and cared for them. Russ López is the author of The Hub of the Gay Universe, an LGBTQ history of Boston, Provincetown, and beyond. He's also the editor of Latin Elit, I think that's how you pronounce it. Latin Elit, and Online magazine that publishes fiction by and about Latin people. His current project, which I'm looking forward to hearing about, is a collection of short stories set in Provincetown, drawing inspiration from the people and places here in Land's End. I don't know if any of you are perhaps wondering where John Taylor Williams is, but he had an accident and unfortunately could not be here today. So Jane Paradise has very graciously said that she would fill in at the last minute. So thank you for coming. Enjoy your time here.
We're so good at this.
We're good at this. So my book was published by Schiffer in 2023, not 19.
Thank you.
Yes.
You
Yes,
thought
it's
you
really
looked well
recent.
deserved.
Yes, and that's the Harry Kempshack, who is known as the poet of the dunes. He's pretty famous at his time. It's now up for lease by the Park Service. That's here nor there.
Yes.
But there were a lot of famous artists, writers, as well as families who, of course, were not famous, who stayed out in the dunes, especially during, like, the famous people stayed during the 1916, when Provincetown Theater, Eugene O'Neill was here, Charles Demuth, Marsden Hartley, and those people. And what I'm going to do before turning it over to Russ, and then we'll have a conversation, is I'll just read you a couple quotes. And then I did bring, so that he wouldn't feel bad, this is The Shores of Bohemia by John Taylor Williams Ike, who was supposed to be here. And in his book, we'll give you a lot of details about the history of the artists that were here and what was happening during that time. My book actually concentrates on when they were in the dunes, while his concentrates on while they were in town. And I'm just giving you really snippets of conversations of when they were here, when they were in the dunes. When Marsden Hartley would go out to sea, Eugene O'Neill had a dune shack. His father gave it to him and Agnes Bolton as a wedding present, and it was the old Peaked Hill Life-Saving Station that eventually fell into the dunes. And what Marsden Hartley said was, whoever will forget those dunes, once having seen them, and the great rumbling, dramatic outside as it was called, the ocean itself, the long stretch of lovely sands and nothing else. They used to go out and visit Eugene O'Neill. He, Charles Demuth, and
Can you use the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry. I can bring it closer. Let me just take it off. Better, okay?
Yeah.
Does that work better? Sure. Sorry about that. I'll repeat that. So Marsden Hartley, Charles Demuth, and other of the artists in town around here during 1916 used to go out and visit Eugene O'Neill at his shack. And Eugene O'Neill used to go swimming every single day, and people used to think he would drown going out there because he would swim really far. He loved it out there. And so Marsden Hartley's quote with one of my photographs is whoever will forget those dunes, once having seen them, and the great rumbling dramatic outside, as it was called, the ocean itself, the long stretch of lovely sands, and nothing else. And it was a special place for all the artists there. And I'm going to read you a Charles Demuth quote, because that came from letters. It came from a letter that he wrote to Eugene O'Neill. So this is a letter he wrote to Eugene O'Neill. I would love to be able to sit on your beach and look at you and be near you in almost silence. And if you read part of John Taylor Williams' books, he goes into a lot between the friendship between Marsden Hartley and Charles Demuth, and he talks about how they were lovers and what was happening all during that time during 1916. And this was the time when the Provincetown Players and the theater came into existence. And that whole history is in John Taylor Williams' book. And in my book, you just get the quotes to give you a flavor of what it was like out in the dunes with these people. And I think the other interesting thing is just kind of a tidbit throw out there fact is Jack Kerouac wrote part of On the Road in a Dune Shack. So he came out here. And people don't realize that. And when he was out here, he actually fell in love with a woman named Nancy and wanted to marry her, and that fell apart. And he actually kept track of all the lovers he had. So he had a notebook with the dates. It's like really crazy, but printed. It's like real. Of all the lovers he had. And back in 1950, there was Nancy that he fell in love with in Provincetown in the dunes. And he actually wrote to the Park Service. When the Park Service originally took over, they wanted to tear down all the dune shacks, kind of like they did, or still do maybe, okay? Jack Kerouac actually wrote to the Park Service and he said, the shacks shouldn't be torn down any more than old adobe dwellings from a park in the Southwest. So he also was very adamant that the shacks should be left standing for their cultural and historical significance. So that's kind of a little tidbit about the shacks. And I'll turn it over to you, Russ.
So I guess I did the first victory here. I got the mic out of the holder here. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the library. And actually, thank you to Provincetown just for being a wonderful place to live. Jane and I were hurriedly consulted each other when we had to sort of regroup before John Taylor Williams had his accident. And we started talking about what makes Provincetown special. Because if you think about it, a lot of the old sort of artist places have disappeared. I don't know if you've been to Key West lately, but it's not what it was. Places like where I come from in California, Monterey, Carmel, it used to be John Steinbeck territory. Clint Eastwood was mayor of Carmel, all those things. It no longer has the cultural ferment. So it made me go back, thanks to Jane, to go really think about why is it we're all here? Why is this here? And as the historian part of me kind of has two ideas. One is the ferment that was in Boston actually before World War I. There was a time from about 1880 to World War I when Boston was probably the most liberal city for LGBTQ people in the country. You had Boston marriages. You had women living openly with each other, like Annie Fields and Sarah Owen Jewett. You had John Singer Sargent would come back here, sketch African American men kind of thing. You had Henry James. You had a lot of people who were not out. It was sort of very much a don't ask, don't tell world. But on the other hand, if two men showed up at the theater with Isabella Stewart Gardner, they were accepted as a couple. People would invite them to social events as a couple, which is something you really don't see anywhere else in the United States at that time. And what's important is that none of those people, zero, zip of them, ever went to Provincetown. So during that wonderful golden age, around 1900 up to ending at World War I, all these very important cultural folks, part of our heritage, none of them came here. They were, just 35 miles across the ocean, right? Never came here. Then all that ended in Boston horribly during World War I. There was a series of crackdowns, mostly forced by the U.S. Navy, which had responsibility for preserving the morals on the home front during World War I. But because of that, the Boston police started going and arresting people off the streets, particularly people they thought were challenging gender roles, but gay men in general, and lesbians in particular. They were arresting them all, hauling them into jail. They were raiding bars and restaurants they would go to. They even started raiding private homes. That's one thing that was going on. There was also a big scandal at the Newport naval base at the time, where they started hunting down gay people and arresting them. Some were in jail for several years. And finally, at Harvard, there was a witch hunt, and about 7, 8 men were expelled. One committed suicide. They did this crackdown that lasted for a very long time. So that's going on. At the very same time, Europe, because of the war, suddenly everybody who was going there couldn't go, because it was, is it really worth going across the North Atlantic when you could be torpedoed, right? Think of the Lusitania and whatnot. And also Paris itself, which was attracting so many artistic people. During wartime when they were rationing food, you really couldn't go there and have a good time, So things were shut down. And what did they do? Thanks to Mary Heaton Vorse, they all came here. And we have the Provincetown Players, we have Marston Hartley, and Charles DeMuth, who wrote in their diaries, they used to go out hunting for men with a tiger-like efficiency. And they also, at one point, ended up living with John Reed and Mabel Dodge, and poor John and Mabel didn't know what to do with them, right? Because they were these guys that were just going crazy, right? And to be part of that legacy is that sometimes people forget that Provincetown has been a queer place, as it were, since, for over 100 years. Sometimes when there's a controversy between gay and non-gay people in town, they'll sort of say, well, these new gay men came into town sort of, as if they were, interlopers of this place that wasn't gay until, usually 2 years before you got here or you were born, right? Then suddenly it was gay, right? But, I first came here in 1981. I guess it wasn't gay till 79, right? Whatever, or whatever. And I think the important thing was that this legacy was that this has really been a gay community for 100 years. And so when people start challenging legitimacy of Provincetown as an LGBTQ place, they forget that legacy. On the other hand, I think the fact that it was so liberal and so welcoming to people is what also kept it being a place of artistic merit. Because, anything goes here. And if the gay people were having a blast, the straight people were really having a wonderful time. One of my favorite comments about Harry Kemp was that he had a tremendous respect for the institution of matrimony. He only slept with married women. So maybe we set the tone, right? We were having such a good time, and the straight people were really having a blast.
And they were all out on the dunes doing it. There used to be howling of the moon parties out on the dunes for both gays and straights. And so when there was a full moon, it was party time, which of course the Park Service does not allow any longer. So once the Park Service took over, that changed a lot. But Eugene O'Neill had lots of parties at his shack, which was given to him again as a wedding present. John Reed, as Russ said, was out there. Agnes Bolton was out there. Louise Bryant, Mabel Dodge, all the people, a lot of these people who came from the Southwest, especially Mabel Dodge, who made her name there, came here. So there were a lot of people who came to Provincetown for its freedom and for its acceptance. The Portuguese fishermen used to give fish to the artists in town and take paintings in return for payment. Hans Hofmann started the first, he came from Germany in 1899 and started the first art school here. He in turn brought Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner here. So he picked them up in Hyannis at the train station and brought them here. And he got stuck in the sand dunes, and Jackson Pollock lifted his car up, and from that, and it was a really funny story. And so Jackson Pollock lifted his car up, and from then on he called him the car. Okay, and eventually they had a really big falling out because one night at Hans Hoffman's house in the west end of town, Jackson Pollock actually threw Hans Hoffman's easel at him and barely missed. His wife's name was Ms. M-I-Z. Barely missed Ms. And Hoffman threw Pollock out of the house, and that was it. There's a lot of wild stories of wild goings-ons and a lot of drunken parties here in town with the artists, which you don't find, I don't think, so much in other places.
People did know how to have a very good time. One of the more interesting things too, I think, what you see from that time is the role of women, where in most parts of the country, I mean, really, till you think of fairly recently, right? Women weren't allowed to be producers. They weren't allowed to have the independence. They weren't allowed to, pursue their own interests the way men were. It was a very sexist world. But also dating back from 1916, there was a very strong support of women and their whatever they wanted to do, right? So really, if there was one person single-handedly we can thank for Provincetown being what it is today, is Mary Heaton Vorse. She was a journalist, she was a writer, she actually had 3 husbands, I believe, in the course of her life.
Yes, she did. And she was a labor activist.
Yes, labor activist. Actually, if you ever get a chance to read her stuff on the Bread and Roses strike in Lowell, Massachusetts, it's not only stirring in terms of the way she writes, but the beauty of her prose, even when talking about a labor strike, is pretty amazing. That continued, right? So, when we have folks coming here, it was always known as a place that women could go and do things. And you see that all the way up to the current age, right? At one point, there must have been 40 women-owned guest houses in town. There was a whole business association of them. It really is a tradition. And again, if you're thinking what makes Provincetown unique as opposed to the rest of the world, and I think one reason why it has continued to attract people and kept its frothiness, and I mean that in a good sense of the word, is the fact that it was a place where women could come and be themselves. And if they wanted to be creators like Blanche Lazelle, they were given the support. There was an audience for what they were doing. If they wanted just to run a business, they somehow could get it together, get the capital they needed and the expertise they needed, and just being allowed to be themselves, to be whatever they wanted to be. And I think that's something that the town really needs to be proud of.
Yes, and it was Mary Heaton Vorse who gave her wharf outside her house for the staging of Eugene O'Neill's first play, Bound East for Cardiff. So it was on her wharf that play was staged. So her house is still there. It's it's the Provincetown Arts Society right now. It's been redone.
And then there was, Ethel Mars and Maud Squire. It was, again, refugees from the wildest of Europe. When they came here, they were openly lesbian, and they had a sort of a penchant for dyeing their hair bright red and bright green and walking down commercial streets. And, think about it, this is 1916. And yet they were allowed to be who they wanted to be. It was a tradition here, right? No one blinked. And in return, they helped, even though they weren't actresses themselves or playwrights themselves, they helped, get the production off the ground. They helped stir up an audience. They helped support it financially, all the different things. So when you create a place where people feel free and people feel welcomed, you end up with a community that then benefits from their being engaged in that community.
Exactly, and Susan Glassbell was also one of the really foremost playwrights that was part of that group that was putting on plays during that time and was instrumental. The Provincetown Players really changed the face of theater in America because theater at that time was very English, very Victorian, very English, and it was the Provincetown Players who changed the face of theater really in the world. And they moved from here in Provincetown to McDougal, I think it was McDougal Street in New York, and they still have the Provincetown Players in New York. There's a sign there, the Provincetown Players in New York City. And, you know, and jumping ahead to the Cape Cod National Seashore, the woman who was instrumental in getting the National Seashore here was Josephine Del Dio. And it was her with Ross Moffat, the artist, who got the seashore passed as it is through Provincetown and Truro. Otherwise, we would have had the Jersey shoreline here without Josephine Del Dio. I mean, she was the one that was instrumental and the key figure in keeping this land pristine. And it is her husband, Sal Del Dio, that the Park Service evicted after last year that they had just praised them as, you know, being instrumental, et cetera, et cetera. And that's who they evicted. But Josephine was truly, with Ross Moffat, the one person who kept this shoreline clear and was instrumental in the Cape Cod National Seashore.
So there's a big change after World War I. When the war ends, Prohibition comes in, and you can only think that Provincetown would be great during Prohibition, right? I mean, you know, we have a 300-year tradition of smuggling, so you know they must have lobbied for that, you know, left and right. Let's let the good times roll, right? So people would come here, and everybody had their stash, everybody had their supplies. Sometimes the amount of alcohol that was reported was just amazing, right? Like, you know, I read a thing about one guy who had like 100 bottles of gin in his house. Like, first of all, who in Provincetown has a house big enough?
Microphone more, could you speak into the microphone?
Oh, sorry.
Both of you.
Okay.
Is it turned on?
Oh. How's that now? Wow. If I only knew. You're lucky I don't sing, actually. Very lucky. Anyway, so some guy had 100 bottles of gin in his house. And I'm thinking, who in Provincetown has that much space, right? So maybe things were cheaper there. But following 1920, whenever you read a diary or the letters of somebody who's gay or lesbian in Boston, sooner or later they're in Provincetown. For a weekend, for a week, for a summer, for a year or two, everybody comes. So from 1920 on, this is a place to be. And to the point where you get to, say, 1939 or 1940, I'm going to mention a guy. He was 29 years old. He had grown up in St. Louis. He was sort of a frustrated playwright, but he had a great agent, and people saw promise in him. And he got a, I think it was from the Rockefeller Foundation, got a $100 a month stipend to spend some time writing. And he goes, well, okay, I want to write and I want to get laid at night. Where am I going to go? And everybody in New York City said, well, there's only one place you go to Provincetown. So by 1940-41, this was the place. And that's why Tennessee Williams came to town. And every time I walk by Captain Jack's Wharf, I think of his time there. By some weird coincidence, at the very summer he was living there, his first summer here in P-Town, there was a WPA photographer who came through town and took a picture on an August morning of Captain Jack's. I keep thinking that, you know, that inside that building must have been, you know, Tennessee Williams. He was notorious no matter how much he drank, no matter how late he stayed out at night, but that every morning he would sit down at his typewriter and work for 6 or 8 hours. So while this photographer from the WPA was walking by taking pictures, there was Tennessee Williams inside Captain Jack's Wharf typing away. And I think you have some stuff.
Well, you know, that's funny you should say that because I also, exactly. And he also, Tennessee Williams also went out to the Dune Shack. So he said, I am moving into a little shanty in the dunes where I can avoid the summer crowds. I find this is a good place to work and I think I will get a play off to you next week. So he also went into the dunes to get away from the summer crowds so he could do some writing, just like Eugene O'Neill and Jack Kerouac and a lot of other writers to get away from the summer crowds. So he spent time also in a dune shack doing writing.
He also sometimes would complain about the gay people here and say, you know, there they were in their Lord and Taylor sarongs, I believe it was, walking up and down Commercial Street. And I just keep thinking, okay, it's the 1940s. How often did you see men in sarongs in this country? You know, and I keep thinking that they're the heirs, right, of the guys you see, let's say, before a solid gold tea dance during Bear Week, when you see guys walk down with the gold lame jock straps. Well, in the 1940s, they would have been there in their sarongs, right, from Lord and Taylor. So he loved it here. He spent 3 summers here, I think, all together. Though I guess after 1947, he hardly came back. He was also getting friends with like Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner and all that group. He was slowly becoming famous, though his real breakthrough didn't come until after the second summer he was here. I always feel weird talking about Tennessee Williams in front of these experts that are here, like Albert. So if I say something wrong, just go like this to me or something. But anyway, what's interesting to me is that, again, if you were a writer, if you wanted a place where you could calibrate what you were doing, right? So if on one particular Friday night, Saturday night, you felt like going to have a wild time, you could come into town and go to the A House and do whatever you wanted to do, or or if you really were stuck on something, you wanted to spend your time writing, you could retreat to the dune shacks or maybe the edge of town, some of the houses. So you could really dive in as much as you wanted to and pull back as much as you wanted to. And that range of experiences here, I think, again, is something that kept Provincetown being a arts center when other places, even then, were beginning to lose some of their luster.
Right, and a lot of the artists did exactly that, like Hans Hofmann. This is a quote from Peggy Huck. Hans Hofmann used to go out every morning as soon as it was bright, around 4 a.m., into the dunes, and he went on foot. He had a travel light, so he had a big pad of paper, about 8 by 10, and a bunch of children's crayons. He did most beautiful dune scenes I've ever seen. And he used to do this very frequently. And another person who always went out to the dunes was Edwin Dickinson. And he would go out to the dunes nude, which of course he could never do today. So Edwin Dickinson loved to go out into the dunes, and he would actually, with a group of friends, start out at Race Point and go all the way down to Pamet and down to Highland Light and Truro and back. They would do 20 miles. They would stop at the Coast Guard stations that were there then, no longer there, and talk to the Coast Guard's people. And he would get inspiration from that. So the artists, like Russ was saying, not only just stayed in town, but used the dunes for inspiration as well as exercise and just enjoyment and partying.
And partying. But also, as I wish John Taylor Williams was here, though maybe as the 3 of us rather than as 2. I don't want to,
That's okay.
But it wasn't just P-Town. They were talking really about Truro and Wellfleet as well. Folks would have big houses or little cabins out in the woods, a little bit up Cape. They would come in, of course, when they wanted to, and I don't know how they drank and drove those days. I don't even want to think about that. But people would come together, and so you had this tradition. Not everybody liked it. Edward Hopper, I guess, was notorious for not liking crowds and not liking people.
And he was also notorious for being like the worst driver in the world and for driving on the wrong side of the road. And everybody wondered why no one got killed. So everybody was always on the lookout for Edward Hopper driving on the wrong side of the road. He was just notorious for that.
It's probably like me driving on the wrong.
And actually, Edwin Dickinson, he moved from Provincetown with his 2 kids and wife to Wellfleet, and he was incredibly poor. And he raised chickens really to survive. And he and his wife and his kids, when they came to Provincetown, he had no car, so he used a bike ride because he was so poor. And he didn't have a breakthrough in his career until later in life. It's like late 60s, maybe 68, 66, before he became a well-known artist and actually had some money coming in. So he was incredibly poor living in Wellfleet.
And now I have to ask Nan a question. Is there anything here in the library that talks about when this was the Chrysler Museum?
No.
You know, again, talk about the characters to a bit here. There was a gentleman who was the heir of the Chrysler fortune from the cars, and he came to P-Town, and I guess, how do I put this politely, he was a huckster, right? He would say, give me a couple of your paintings, and I'm going to put them in a museum, and they'll be there for the whole world to see. And people, sadly, I guess, believed him, right? He was a good talker, and would give them things. This is back in the 60s, I believe, right? 50s and 60s. And eventually he just sort of packed up and left with everybody's artwork. And I guess the museum is now in Florida someplace, which...
Yeah, I think it is in Florida. Walter Chrysler. It was Walter Chrysler.
But it's a museum, right?
Yeah, this was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
museum.
It's another museum.
Yeah, it's another museum.
Another
I just kind of think about what this must have been like, right? They must have put like partitions up to put the paintings on or something, right? Sort of. And it must have been quite the amazing thing.
Well, this was a church before that. Wasn't this
Yeah.
the Methodist church?
Until the mid-50s.
To the mid-50s. So before the Chrysler Museum, it was the Methodist church.
So the artwork he took from here is in Florida, in that museum?
I believe so.
That museum is in Norfolk, Virginia.
Norfolk, Virginia. Okay, this gentleman. Norfolk, Virginia.
He went several places before he finally settled down, I guess. But again, it kind of tells you the rogues that have lived in this town.
Yes. A lot of stories in this town. And, a lot of recent people too, like Ann Patchett used to go to the dunes all the time, the author Ann Patchett. So I quote her in my book too, and she does this quote about, glad to see people going over the Sagamore Bridge once all the tourists are gone.
Yeah, people do have a love-hate relationship with the tourists in this town.
Yes.
Of course, we're all local, so yeah, it doesn't include us. It's everybody. Again,
It's everybody else.
It's everybody who arrived here. If the town wasn't gave until 2 years before I got here, it was run by the tourists like 6 weeks after I got here. It's the same sort of thing. I noticed that in Boston. If you ask anybody who lives in Boston, whether they grew up there or moved there since, it's that Boston reached its low point in its history the year before they were born or the year before they arrived. It's just one of those natural things that kind of people do. But Provincetown continues to attract folks. So you kind of wonder, like a guy like John Waters, where in the world would he have gone if not here? I mean, I guess lives in Baltimore, and he has his friends and his family there, and actually his artwork is now at the Baltimore Museum of Art. But, it seems when you see John Waters, his films, his books, he himself riding his bike, you think, he just fits in here. There's something about this place, this town, this whatever, that, of course he lives here. Like, where else is he going to live? He's not going to live in, I don't know, the Hudson Valley, or any of these other places. We might be cheaper, but there's something about this place that keeps
There is
bringing us
something
back.
about this place. There is. I have one more quote, okay? So back to Eugene O'Neill, who really loved this place and really got a lot of his early plays done in the Dune Shack. So Eugene O'Neill boasted of having the Atlantic as his front lawn and miles of sand dunes as his backyard. He didn't have to wear clothes, as there were no houses within sight, and there were none of the unrefined refinements of civilization. He described the 3-mile walk to town, up and down over sand dunes, as the penalty one paid for communication with the world of people.
Yeah, I think that's another theme about Provincetown over the last 100+ years, is that there's always naked people in the dunes.
Yes, you just got to be careful of the Park Service these days, because they will ticket you.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about my current project. I've written 6 history books, includes a textbook and whatnot. And I love doing research. I actually just saying that I actually want to write a book about Forum 49, which was this wonderful series of lectures here in 1949 that's was at the, it's now Keels down on Commercial Street. Anyway, it introduced abstract expressionism to the world. Provincetown was the center. They had a series of Thursday night kinds of things. The first one, like several hundred people showed up. It was a tremendously interesting cultural phenomenon in the world, and no one's written about it, strangely enough. But to do that, I had to go to Lincoln, Nebraska, and do some research. And so I'm lazy, so I like staying here. You know, because you can't leave here in the summertime because of all the excitement, and you can't leave here in the wintertime because that's the best time of the year. So it's hard to leave. But there's a limitation of writing history, in that you have to find the facts. You have to find somebody who said X, or somebody who did X. And that's a limitation, right? So I was thinking, what would I have liked to have read from other folks that doesn't exist? And I thought, it's really more stories. There really needs to, there's been a lot of stories written, but there really needs to be more. And there needs to be sort of contemporary stories. Because, even though I'm kind of up there in age, I feel there's a mortality, not only myself, but also in Provincetown. When the glaciers melt and the sea level rise 50 feet, this will all be underwater. And no one will remember all the fun and all the tears that we had here. So I've started writing short stories that are based upon sort of real things, and I'm going to read you one little section, one short piece from something, and you'll recognize certain things, but they sort of start with like a kernel of something that happened like on Commercial Street, and then I sort of, make it to a bigger thing so that you kind of get the feel for what this place was like. Because again, someday we're all going to be gone, and I want people to remember just what a special place there was. So I've had about a half dozen of these stories already published, and I just need to write more to get enough to have actually a collection published. But here's one that's called Scenes from Commercial Street. And my big fear in life is that I'm visually impaired, which is why I'm such a bad driver, and I can relate to Hopper. It's also why I would never be an artist, because I would get my nose on the canvas if I was ever painting. So I write big. But it also means if I ever walk by one of you and you think I was just being stuck up, it's just because I'm blind. But anyway, this is some excerpts from something called Scenes from Commercial Street. Many Provincetown residents avoid Commercial Street between Memorial and Labor Day. Given the crowds that converge on that narrow mile-long stretch of stores, restaurants, and boutiques, we know how they feel because it can be claustrophobic. Others stubbornly drive down the street on mob summer afternoons with their eyes closed and foot on the gas pedal. They curse pedestrians and yell at bicyclists as they venture forth to buy a single stamp at the post office. We empathize with them because we also get annoyed by the madness and cluelessness of sometime visitors. Most love Commercial Street, however, because it's a diva, it's an extravaganza, a spectacle, a circus. Commercial Street is like your overdressed ex-girlfriend after she's had one too many cocktails at your wedding. It is as loud as a hyperactive drag queen with a live mic, and as subtle as a spam email asking for your social security number. If you spend a day away from gaudy P-Town, you'll be overwhelmed by the fear of missing out. Leave garish Commercial Street for a week, and it feels like an eternity. You can't hide on Commercial Street. With thousands of eyes on you, people see every move and hear every word. Feedback is instantaneous, and there is no avoiding looks of envy, lust, contempt, and disgust. The best advice is to feel free to act crazy on this zany street. Just about everyone here behaves like a refugee from a screwball comedy. So strut, pose, and take a bow because this is your big moment in the spotlight. The crowds vary across the season. Beer-chugging young lesbians dominate Memorial Day weekend. Older lesbians have a week in late July, and October is famous for Fantasy Fair, an event for genderqueer and trans people. Tweaks have 4th of July week, with bears taking over immediately afterwards, creating a wondrous scene as the hirsute and burly collide with the smooth and lean on Changeover Saturday. Families also get a week, and there are festivals celebrating dance, film, and books. Many simply visit on the only days they can take vacation, while retirees show up in May after the weather warms and leave before the first frost. Then there are the year-rounders, some of whom have been here for generations, others anticipating the first winter on the Cape. Commercial Street's cacophony is as strident as its visuals. Drag queens, comedians, and singers loudly implore passersby to come to their shows promoting body jokes and upbeat music. Ignore them at your peril, because some will get mad if you refuse to take a handbill, and they will chase you down the street as they scream obscenities. Over-amplified piano players sing pop tunes as restaurants pump out loud music to set a mood. Long-lost friends shriek in joy upon chance reunions alongside summer workers shouting greetings to each other in Bulgarian. Meanwhile, a motorcycle guns his engine as he passes that little girl pulling a red wagon, yelling at the top of her lungs for you to buy her lemonade. Anybody remember that one? One busker brings you to tears through her beautiful rendition of your late mother's favorite song. Another makes you cry because he knows neither the words to his song or its key. A crowd gathers on the sidewalk in front of the post office to watch a marimba player using her entire body to put on a show. Her shoulders roll as the melody rises and falls. Her feet rock to the beat, and her nimble hands create a breathtaking whirl of activity. Her music, a fast-paced, jazz-inspired riff on the Maple Leaf Rag, enthralls her audience and compels two children, little older than toddlers, to dance a frenzied jig. Their parents, a stray couple from Connecticut, don't notice because they are sharing a kiss, reveling in the romantic moment. Provincetown is the perfect place to honeymoon, and the street is a pageant of proposals, weddings, and anniversary celebrations. Couples who have been together for 50 years chat up duos who have just met. Feel free to kiss, cuddle, hold hands, or do whatever feels right while on the street. Day and night, it fosters romance. Two women with identical haircuts and matching shirts giggle and hug as they hail a pedicab. Alana is in love with me, one tells the driver as they climb in. She just doesn't know it yet. Alana has such a glow about her that everyone jealously watches them leave. Provincetown uses sex to lure visitors with risque shows and window displays that feature extremely revealing clothes and accessories that demand active imaginations to figure out how to use them. With so much raw desire in the air, it can seem that everyone is getting laid except you. But sex in Provincetown is a brutal competition. There was always someone better looking or somebody trying to get the one you want. On top of this, there was ageism, sexism, fat shaming, and 100 other bad reasons for getting rejected. Personally, I can't think of a good reason for rejection, but that's me. It's me. This can shatter the ego of the most well-adjusted, with bruised self-esteem as common as sunburned skin on Commercial Street. Brendan told me he is 20% gay and 80% straight, the attractive young woman complains, perplexed. I have nothing against bi men, but I'm not sure how much longer I can be in a relationship with him if he keeps doing things with guys. She grabs onto the arm of the young man she is with, thinking he would make a better boyfriend. How does he know these numbers? Does Brendan have a spreadsheet where he keeps track of who he's having sex with? I immediately thought that apparently, Jack Kerouac did. Well, why not Brendan, right? We did not rehearse this part. Who he's having sex with asks her handsome friend as he pulls her tight for a kiss. He can't wait to hook up with Brendan again. Many come to Provincetown despite the noise and excitement because they savor the peaceful moments they discover in its open spaces and its serenity during off hours. If you look closely, you can find these lucky folks eating dinner by themselves, staring blissfully at the beautiful, brilliant water in the bay, or happily alone on a towel far away from the social scene at Herring Cove Beach. Mornings can be quiet on Commercial Street in that time between sunup and brunch. That's where you can find the world-famous novelist who relaxes in the anonymity of a beat-down summer. In June, he sits by himself on a bench in front of Spiritus, quietly reading Proust. He devotes July to Dostoevsky and spends August reading graphic novels, starring in Impish Mouse. No one recognizes him. Now, if you go up to Spiritus and start harassing this poor man, he'll never forgive me. So, Passions are at least a step more extreme on Commercial Street than elsewhere. P-Town tries to force people to loosen up, but many, tightly wrapped in a need of complete control of their emotions, find the lack of guide rails difficult, and not everyone thrives in the freedom of Provincetown air. Commercial Street is not the place for those who can't control themselves. I threw the book on the ground and stomped on it. You're an idiot, this whole class is stupid, and I'll be damned if I keep up with this. I shouted at him, I don't need to be here with all these losers. The man's dark hair is so precisely combed that it looked like he had set his part with a ruler, yet his hands shake as if he had just quit smoking a day ago, and he keeps turning around to see if he's being followed. Well, I guess you won't be going back then. In contrast, his friend's shirt is misbuttoned, and one pant leg is rolled up an inch higher than the other. He doesn't know it yet, but the next time he tries to tie his shoes, the laces will break. I have no choice to keep going. The judge ordered me to take this anger management class for no good reason. If I don't pass, I go to jail. Believe it or not, these are true stories. To finish up here. Commercial Street is our Roman Forum, our Parisian Boulevard, and our one-person Broadway show. A walk from T-Dance to home in the East End takes barely 20 minutes during the winter. In July, the same route can take 2 hours. 3 if you stop to have a drink at the Old Colony Tap or Harbor Lounge. The difference comes from the friends, neighbors, ex-lovers, and everyone else you stop to talk to. Visit Commercial Street to gossip, say hello, and share a smile. Greet old friends and meet new ones. This social scene, as much as the beach, shopping, and nightlife, keeps drawing us back to this little spit of land. We put up with the high cost of living, the mobs of tourists, and other irritations because we love this place. We love our people and our street. I do feel I'm going to have to move after this comes out. At first, people were like lobbying not to be in it. Now they're lobbying me to be included in it. So, anyway,
That was great.
I guess we're ready for questions, comments, rebuttals.
I have one. I missed part of this, so Jane may have already spoken to this, but it seems to me that there was a culture of people who lived out in the dunes, separate from just that search for solitude and the ability to work and so forth. There were families who actually lived in the dune shacks, right?
Yes.
And did you talk about that, or can you talk about it now a little bit?
I can talk about it now. There were a lot of families out there, and part of the whole artists being out there, the families actually feel kind of neglected in this whole discussion about artists being out there, because there are more families out there than there have been artists out there. So the dune shacks were originally built by lifeguardsmen who, in some cases, built them to get away from their wives, and in some cases built them so their wives could go out there with them. So it was a combination of both. A lot of the townspeople, like the Meads family, which is an old Provincetown family, the fishermen here in town built shacks out there so they could fish on the back shore, not only fish here in the bay. So the houses, the shacks, some of them are not shacks. They are actually well-built houses that have generators, running water. Some of them are shacks like you see on the cover where, you know, it's 120 square feet. Some of them are 600 square feet, 500 square feet. They have multiple rooms. They all have outhouses, except for a few of them where the outhouse is actually connected within, and it's a composting toilet. There's an essay at the back of my book done by Mildred Champlin. She's 94 years old now. She and her husband discovered their shack in 1952, and it was run down, and they built it back up. It's called Professor's Row because the family next to them, the Armstrong family, was also a professor like her husband, and they bought their shack. These shacks were bought and sold. They weren't just squatters, like the Park Service might have you believe. They actually bought and sold these shacks. They pay taxes to Provincetown and Truro, so they've always been paying taxes. The Armstrong family has just been evicted as well as we all hear about Sal Del Dio being evicted. The Armstrong family has been there since 1952 as well. And they had to clear out all of their belongings because their shack is up for lease. There are 9 shacks that are up for lease, for a 10-year lease to the Park Service put out the RFP. All of those shacks are owned by families, and there is one artist out of those 9 leases. Out of the 9 leases. And they've been on year-to-year leases for a while. But they have been mostly families that have been out there for a long time. Really going back to the 1800s.
And did people raise their kids out there as well?
Um,
I mean, did the kids go into school you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying. Nobody really occupied them during the winter. So they were never really occupied during the winter. One man occupied it year-round. And he stopped living there year-round about 5 or 6 years ago. Michael Mailer, Norman Mailer's eldest son, did the foreword for my book, and he used to go out there every summer with his mother, Beverly Bentley. He never really lived with Norman. If anybody here in Provincetown knows, Norman Mailer lived in town, on the east end of town. It was one of the 2 brick houses in town. He never lived there. He actually grew up as a townie. Michael Mailer did. He went to local schools here, and he would go out to the dune shacks with his mother all the time in the summer. So he did the introduction to my book. People raised their kids there all summer long. The minute they were born, out to the dune shacks. They lived there all summer long from May through September until the kids had to go back to school, summer after summer. So the people who are really now in their 70s spent every summer there. It's what they know, and it's a lifestyle that they're trying to preserve. If you talk to people like Josephine Del Dio, who died, this is their lifestyle, and this is where they lived. This is their whole life, and that's what they're trying to preserve, that they feel that the Park Service is taking that away from them. When the Park Service had an open, you could go out and visit the shacks that were up for lease. I went out to see a couple of them that I had not seen before, the ones that are in private family hands versus the ones that you can go into a lottery to visit. And I was there were 4 other people in the car that I was in. None of them had been to Cape Cod before, okay? Let alone even heard of the dune shacks, or they had no connection whatsoever, and they would have no idea what it's like to be in a dune shack. And that means, when you have a dune shack, once a blizzard comes along, storms come along, shingles fall down, there's mice that infest the dune shack. You have to go out there and take care of these dune shacks in the winter, not just in the summer. And there were people who had never been to Cape Cod before, who were going to put in a bid to take care of the dune shacks. It was really rather shocking. It was like they thought it was a vacation place. And it's not a vacation. There's a lot of maintenance that goes along with these dune shacks, including the dune shacks getting overrun by sand. Dune shacks have to be moved, they have to be dug out. There's just a ton of maintenance that goes along with this. So it'll be interesting to see how this really plays out. All the people that have the dune shacks on their leases, I believe they all put in the RFP to get the 10-year lease. The Park Service is now delayed saying who is going to get the lease for them. So we'll see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you. This has been fabulous. I enjoyed John Taylor Williams' book, and we read it in the Truro Library book group. And one of the things that was kind of interesting was he had sort of a Provincetown either way.
Yes. Yes, I have that marked actually.
The chapter, I guess, where he really talks about a lot of the gay activity. But I thought he mentioned that there was an actual art school by 2 women was here before Hans Hofmann in that gay section, which was very interesting. Because historically, he only mentioned one of the women's names, but it was very interesting that they're sort of lost.
There were maybe 9 or 10 art schools. If you sort of remember the big ones, but back in the 1890s, there were a lot of art schools in town. I believe somebody's, where, I don't know whether it's John's book or someplace, I read that, on any given week, there were like 500 plus students
Is that right?
in town, so.
It was amazing the number of art schools there were in town. It was really shocking, actually. And the other thing with the abstract expressionism and old school, the Provincetown Art Association and Museum used to hold 2 art shows for their members. One for the traditionalists and one for the new abstract expressionists. Never the twain shall meet, because they were arguing and fighting all the time. And I don't know which year that they finally said, the hell with this, and we're gonna have one show, and that's it. But they would fight and argue all the time on the 2 separate things. And the number of artists that came through here really is just really amazing. I mean, Red Grooms, and Hans Hoffman didn't get his show. Peggy Guggenheim gave him and Jackson Pollock their first shows. The other interesting thing is Rothko. Mark Rothko was here for 4 summers. And there's a lot of evidence, some of it stronger than other, is that he got a lot of the inspiration for the Rothko chapels while he was here with Milton Avery and Gottlieb.
A couple of years ago, PAB did a exhibit on Helen Frankenthaler and Robert Motherwell, and they have Helen Frankenthaler's like calendar open, and it's it's like Saturday night. The Rothkos are coming for dinner. Must get hamburger and potatoes to serve them. It's like, can you just imagine? Oh, the Rothkos are coming for dinner. La, la, la.
And of course, Robert Motherwell lived and died here. Died on the way to the hospital.
And he's buried here.
And he's buried here in the cemetery, as well as Norman Mailer and
Hans Hoffman's buried in Truro.
Truro. Yep.
Questions?
Thank you both. This has been very interesting. Do you have a sense or any kind of feeling about what the future holds? We are not locals, but we come every summer for 20 years, I guess, almost 20 years. And we've noticed a gradual shift, basically economic driven. It just feels different. And there was an article in the paper, I guess it was in the New York Times, about the Nantucketization process. And I wonder if one of the things I'd like is the inclusivity here. Sometimes I call it the island of misfit toys. It feels comfortable here. And I'm probably the only misfit here, but it feels comfortable. And I wonder if that will go away with the presence of people not living here full-time, and not being fisher people, being, artists, starving writers, whatever.
I feel like there's more people living here full-time. So I'm a full-time resident, and my husband and I moved here year-round in 2013, so 10 years now. I think since COVID, there are more people here year-round than there has ever been, okay? So it seems like there's an influx to me of year-round people. I don't know. What do you think, Russ?
Yeah, I think it's complicated in that, as so many parts of the world and parts of the United States become inhospitable, politically, I think that drives people here. And now I'm beginning to worry that if the rest of the country is going to be 100 degrees all summer long, can you imagine? You come here, right? It's going to be only, 75 or 80, right? This is going to be paradise. And when people discover that, oh my God, it's really going to, there's going to be another, maybe I should take this out of the recording, So I think that, on one hand, I think that you are getting these wealthy folks. There's a house, a 1-bedroom down the street, 5.9 million is kind of staggering, right? On the other hand, I think you'll find still a lot of people come in for short periods of time, so maybe a week or two. And certainly like the Fine Arts Work Center will, is an institution that will help bring people here and get them here, and help them overcome the barriers to here. But I do worry about with these, the merely wealthy can't afford it here anymore. You have to be, if you could drop $6 million on a house that you're only going to use, a couple of weeks a year, or even 10 weeks, let's say, what does that say about what your whole wealth is like, right? I like to meet them, I'm married, but maybe I'm in the will. It is frightening, isn't it? It's just frightening.
It is, but so I don't know whether they're tourists that are coming more in the winter, but the restaurants certainly seem more crowded
Yeah.
year-round in the winter, okay, than they were before. And they're also, the restaurants are staying open later. So my husband and I, previously, he has severe Alzheimer's now, so I don't go out with him. But before it was, his Alzheimer was as bad as it is, we used to go out. And we happen to be late people, okay? So we're used to going out at 8 o'clock, not 6, okay? So we used to call into the Muse restaurant our order, okay, to get last call, right? Because the kitchen used to close at like 7:30. It's like, oh my God, we got to call. Or they knew us and they would call us saying, you coming? You better put in your order now. Well, now it's like we don't have to anymore because they're open. They're open. And that wasn't true before. So restaurants, they're just staying open later with people there later. Even like 10 o'clock at night, there's people in there. And that wasn't true before. So that's a shift that's been happening over the last few years for whatever reason. I think it's great, okay? The servers may not like it, but I personally think it's great.
It's interesting, and I don't know what's going to happen. Certainly, I think the West End we've kind of lost the West End, it's too late for those, not that I wouldn't mind living there if I ever, if I buy a few more of my books, maybe I could afford it over there. But I think there still are places, I think that people will still do anything they can to come here. It's just going to be more harder and they're not going to stay as long. I realize I'm part of the problem. We're mostly here, but we're not exclusively here. Like if there's a concert in Boston, we'll stay at a Boston place kind of thing. But we are here in January, February, March when you think the town's empty, but then you can, Max will have ramen night. And you get there, there's a line. It's like, you get it at 8:30, right? You think, well, you're after the crowd, right? That sweet spot where the crowd's gone, but they haven't closed the kitchen. No, there's a line to get seated. So, it's kind of nice that there are people here. But it is going to be interesting.
What other changes do you anticipate with climate change, especially in the dunes? Do you have any thought for what's coming environmentally here?
So for the dunes, they're losing one section from what I can see, right? So a lot of the shacks have been over the years, certainly over the course since the 1930s, like when Eugene O'Neill's shack went into the ocean, which was like 33 or 31. A lot of the shacks have been moved back, okay? But nearer towards Truro, there's been sand built up. But on the other side of Truro, by Ballston Beach, that's been losing sometimes 10 feet in 1 year. So, and then on the bay side, shifting sands. Yeah, the sands are shifting. I mean, it's been building up in other places. There's a lot of room for those shacks to keep moving back because you've still got like a mile moving back towards Route 6. So
some of the more environmentally sensitive areas don't appear to be as...
Well, they're on sand. All the dunes, when the Pilgrims first came here, that was all wooded trees. The Pilgrims all cut that down. That was all forest. But they needed wood for fire and wood for houses. So that was all cut down. And then beach grass was planted. There's old Travelers Insurance Company ads showing people planting grass on the dunes. But that was all cut down.
Part of it, there's a natural progression of the Cape anyway, and even without climate change, parts of it are growing, parts of it are losing, and if it wasn't for humanity, it would slowly move westward, and eventually, all of B-Town will have to transfer whatever. I think, a couple miles to the west, which then will be sand, right? I do worry that with rising sea level, things, are going to be more, floods are going to be more frequent. I think that with even the worst case scenarios, the Cape will survive and P-Town will survive. I don't get, every time I drive, I'm a naturally anxious person, so every time you come into town on Route 6 and there's that, there's the lake on one side and the shacks, the little houses, the days cabins on the other side. I think one big storm, right, and we're all going to be stuck here for until they rebuild the road. I also worry. I can worry about everything, right? Again, I worry about a fire starting at the seashore, right? What happened in Maui? It just seems like but hopefully we'll look out and I'll be here for all I need is another 40 years, right? I won't be buried around that pier, but I guess
It used to be a wooden bridge, that connected Provincetown to Truro. So East Harbor actually it was a harbor that came in from the bay side. And it used to be a wooden bridge that just kept getting knocked out and knocked out. And then so they filled it in and connected it, right? And now they built, what's it called, a culvert? Underneath.
Culvert, yeah.
They built the culvert underneath, so the water.
The natives had the good sense not to live in P-Town year-round. They were summer residents. They came out here to fish during the summer, and then they would go back up Cape because there isn't enough water to live here year-round. This never was really good for agriculture. So, they had the good sense not to try to make a year-round residence. Only these imperialist Europeans that we think.
Conquer that environment.
Right, we can do anything, we can shape everything. The number of restoration projects in marshes and wetlands and stuff along the Cape, to me, is just amazing, right? Because, we used to think that, we just could dike things off and, everything will be fine, and we find those are ecological disasters. So even when you read John's book, right, you start reading about, this was an island, and then, at some point they built the little dike, and somehow it was no longer the end of the world. It was, right there, 5 minutes from Wellfleet Center or something.
Right, East Harbor to Pilgrim Lake, now back to East Harbor.
Fascinating presentations, thank you. Could you speak to the origin of the gay guest house in Provincetown?
It was a very interesting thing. I mean, traditionally, what was the way guest houses were run, they were run by Portuguese women. Their husbands would be very sexist sex roles, right? The husbands would be fishing, and they would have the house, and they would rent out the rooms. And so this way they had a good income, right? It allowed these families to be here. Beginning in the 60s, really, and then really exploded in the 70s, you found lesbians and gay men buying more and more of the guest houses. And for many years, there was quite the thriving set of guest houses. Beginning in the 80s, people realized that they could cash out by converting them into condos. And that's really when you had the big lie, 80s into the 90s, when so many guest houses were converted into small condos. And that was, I've never seen anybody really doing numbers on it, but if you never graphed it, it'd be like, from here down to here. And now we're just kind of, dealing with the ones that have survived. And I hope most of them survive. Though again, every time you lose one, it doesn't ever seem like anybody's ever converting a big old house into a rooming house. It's only if somebody buys a rooming house and converts it into a full townplex. I do wonder whether that's also pushing for the short-term rentals market, because you no longer can come in and rent a room. Though, as I was telling somebody back in they were lamenting that there was a day like in the early 80s when you could, for $35 or $40, you could come in here and spend the night. And I said, well, that was all great, but I didn't have that much money back when I was a kid. It was, to me, Provincetown has always been unaffordable to a certain extent.
Russ, I just was reminded when you were talking about the Portuguese housewives renting rooms, which is absolutely how the guest houses started. There's a fabulous quote in Karen Kerhulik's book. If you don't know it, it's a wonderful history of Provincetown based on some serious oral history research. Provincetown in the 20th century, most quotes a Portuguese housewife as saying, first of all, they called all the gay men bachelors, the bachelors, they said, you know. And one Portuguese housewife said, oh, we much preferred the bachelors because they were so neat.
And we had better hats.
Anybody else?
Do you want to say anything about your photography process? It's an art.
It's an art. So I did this book over the course of like 10 years. I've stayed out in about 7 different shacks, about 10 weeks. I did an artist residency once for 2 weeks. I have different projects. I have a series of old women that I photographed, including the woman who photographed the women on the pier, Norma Holt. So I have that series of photographs going. I have a project right now called My Husband Has Alzheimer's. I chronicle it on Instagram, which actually goes over to Facebook as well. And I've been doing that since the pandemic, and I record our conversations, though less so our conversations now. But I started that, and I'm probably going to turn that into a book. I do a lot of research, like Russ does. So I read, 50 books, probably researching just for this Dune Shack book, just to get quotes to match with the photographs. I do a lot of text with my photographs. So my photographs that I did with the women I photographed, it started with Norma Holt here in town. She was pretty funny and she was very articulate, and so I would write down her sayings, and I matched her sayings with the photographs of her. And that's kind of been shown all over the world. And then I did the same with my aunt and my mother. I did my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law was not articulate at all. So those photographs kind of stand alone. The photograph stands alone anyway, but I think the text sometimes enhances the photographs, like with this book. And that took a long time to match the photographs with the text. And I'm kind of tempted to do a book like this about Provincetown, because I've got a lot of stories about Provincetown, not just the Dune Shacks, and do a photograph with the snippets of text, because it's not only part of the Dune Shack book has stories, wild stories, like stories about white horses going into the sea. Sometimes the old sailors used to call the waves, the whitecaps, white horses, because of an old story that there was a cargo ship coming along that had horses, and one horse survived. He came to shore and he was white, and then he went back into the sea, and so they used to call the whitecaps white horses. And there's another story that one of the shacks, the Lhasa, the floor of the Lhasa is made from the boards of a shipwreck, and so people won't stay there because they feel like ghosts come up from there. So it's not only factual stuff that's in this book, but just snippets of random, funny, or poignant stories that have gone on about town, to give you a flavor of what it's like culturally out in the Dune Shacks. And you can read The Shores of Bohemia by John Taylor Williams to get all the history, and Russ's book for the history, and other books for the full history of town and the dunes.
Thank you guys so much.